Taking a look into this 25 class for Deshaun Foster, a couple of his top commits, nowhere to be found, flipping high schools. What does that mean for UCLA going forward?
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxheimer. Thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Brand new mobile game, completely free, no ads, 100% playable offline. Use the code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost for your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. And how Deshaun Foster began his coaching legacy, an ugly but gritty 16-13 win. But large in part, what Deshaun Foster's been able to do off the field in recruiting has been one of the major positives for this UCLA program. Because if you're going to go to X's and O's, Chip Kelly versus Deshaun Foster, large in part, you're going to get Chip Kelly to win. He can do a little more with what this roster has than how Eric Bieniemy could do week one. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But the big thing for Deshaun Foster that he has going for him is the extreme effort put forth by his staff to go towards recruiting the 25 class, the 26 class, and beyond for UCLA to get talent to compete in the Big Ten and replenish what is a missing class in the 24 class, right? UCLA doesn't have a lot of talent in depth, in bulk and depth. Right? They have some talented guys, but where are they second, third parts of the roster where, hey, there's a battle for the starting offensive line spot or something, right? Just for an example. And you're wondering, hey, who's going to battle? Okay. So what Deshaun Foster's been doing is hitting the recruiting classes. The big story over the weekend, as much as we were lost in the foray about UCLA barely beating Hawaii, which Deshaun Foster going to look like, the big story I saw, I'm not sure if any of you guys listening, watching, you probably did, but let's talk about it. It's UCLA's top commit, arguably the 25 class, Madden IAMALEAVA, and then you've got Jace Brown, his high school teammate, or so we think, both big key components of the UCLA 25 class, and they're changing high school. So I thought that's interesting, right? You remember you've got Nico IAMALEAVA, who is the big dude now at Tennessee. He went there early. And now he's the starter, right? You've got IAMALEAVA for the Vols. And let's look at the story, right? So this is something I saw just the day or two before the UCLA game. It was initially posted by Eric Sondheimer, the LA Times. If you don't know him, he's the guru. He is the guru of the SoCal high school sports scene. Talking about when he posted, receiver Jace Brown checked out of Warren and didn't play in Warren's loss to Gardena Sarah, 36-0, where that game ended at halftime, which is a whole nother issue we're not even going to talk about. And that the quarterback, Madden, who is the top commit, depending on what composite rankings, whether it's Rival or 24/7 Sports, for UCLA, and is supposed to take potentially the mantle from Ethan Garbers and potentially challenge Justin Martin and the rest of this freshman QB class next year for the starter's role in what could be an Eric Bieniemy offense or whatever it looks like in 25. Madden IAMALEAVA was not with the team. The IAMALEAVA story is a unique one, right? Nico himself started at Long Beach Poly. Then he went to Warren for 2 years. Then spent the spring semester, I believe, of his junior year in Long Beach Poly. Then both Nico and Madden transferred back to Warren. And now that it's the senior year, I think Madden and Jace Brown, they're nowhere to be found. And this is where Tarek Fatal, another reporter for SB Live Sports, talked about this. This is what he posted on social media. Another high school reporter said he reached out to Madden's dad about the situation and that had he checked out of Warren. No, he has not. Thank you was the response. But then Madden was no longer at the game at Warren. So one, the receiver was not there, and they're no longer on the Max Preps roster, and that's something that's, of concern. But to also recap, after all that movement from Nico IAMALEAVA, the big thing is that was Madden's older brother. He still enrolled early at Tennessee, despite going from Long Beach Poly, Warren, Long Beach Poly, back to Warren in literally a few months to finish out his senior year. Now, I'm not entirely sure where Madden's going to end up. There's no official movement, but you just wonder, all right, in this day and age, the portal means things from college, NIL, all the way down to high school, literally in the middle of the season, right? Literally in the middle of the season where he played his team's first game in week 0, which is what they do in high school football. Week 1, then he wasn't there against a Sarah team that probably could have been given a more competitive game if he had their top receiver, one of their top receivers, and one of the top SoCal QBs playing, right? Madden is supposed to be the steal and the gem at the moment of a big recruiting class for UCLA in 2025. Now, I'm not sure if that'll change anything if and where he ends up, if he even ends up leaving Warren. And of course, I don't have any official feet on the ground, but just reading and looking, it's something that's worth noting about, hey, this is the guy that's coming to the program. This is someone who may be in charge next year as the quarterback if he's given the opportunity, if he stays committed, right? That's always the big thing. Because remember, as much as we make big deals about commits, as much as we make big deals about getting NILs for the Dante Moores of the world, not to say anything about him, but he was a big 5-star commit. They're high school kids with still drama and all sorts of other nonsense behind the scenes, whether that's the case in this situation or not. I'm not going to comment about whether it's him, whether it's a dad, whether it's a coach, because Warren's head coach did step down prior to the season, which was a big potential factor in this. Stepped down, shockingly, I think earlier in 24, which was some big news for Warren. But it is unique that you got guys checking out in the middle of their high school seasons, the middle of their senior high school seasons. And that's the guys, these are the guys you're bringing into the program. Chip Kelly did his best to have no-nonsense type of guys. And that's why for a large portion, you never saw a lot of crazy nonsense in the UCLA game. And this is probably why Chip Kelly hated to recruit. You go into the backyard of these, local high schools, guys who could easily go to private schools, and you do with this type of nonsense being a big focus for the recruiting classes to bring to UCLA. All right. So you wonder, how is that going to affect things going forward? It doesn't mean much, even if he goes to another high school or everything. Nico still is playing at Tennessee and enrolled early. You just wonder what the mental makeup of these kids are, not them specifically, but the recruiting classes going forward. It's a different ball game when it comes to all the kids are asking about NIL first. They want playing time. Now everybody can get a scholarship with increased scholarships. It's a different ball game recruiting. And maybe the benefit for Deshaun Foster as opposed to Chip Kelly is, yes, he did go lead recruiting and go do different things for UCLA, but being the head man, he doesn't know a prior history to where it was gaming with these high school recruits about NIL. And he just knows, all right, this is the system now. We're going after it. And he's getting it done, which is what Chip would have never wanted to do. And Deshaun Foster, able to get high school kids, even if they're changing high schools, and hopefully for the time being, remain committed to UCLA. Now, I'm not sure how it'll end up. Maybe they go back one more time, but it is something to monitor if it affects them going forward in terms of their commitment to UCLA, how early they can get there if they're early enrollees. And then, hey, it's a different age from high school football, youth sports, all the way to the college, amateur, barely can we say amateur anymore, student athlete level up to the pros. It's a different ball game. So where are they? Who knows specifically? It's still to be updated, and it's a fluid situation potentially, and I don't know all the answers, but it is something to look forward, and was something over the weekend during UCLA's week 1 game that maybe might have flown under the radar if you weren't specifically looking at the prep sports scene. Maybe they're back, maybe they're not. But keep an eye on it. We'll keep you updated here on Locked On UCLA for what it means moving forward from now. Speaking of moving forward, can UCLA's team for the second consecutive year, is it possible 2 straight years when you go from a Chip Kelly-led team to an Eric Bieniemy coached offense, that the defense with a new defensive coordinator for the 4th straight year could actually be leading this team? Let's talk about it next on Locked On UCLA. Talk about a brand new mobile game. It's Ultimate College Football Head Coach, an amazing game in simulation where you can step into the shoes of Deshaun Foster, lead the Bruins to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of the UCLA Bruins? All that smack you talk on social media, everything else, well, you can go recruit the players. hire coaching staff, and oversee training camps while handling school scholarships. You control every crucial detail of the program that can help shape the future and legacy of the program. Calling plays offensively, strategy to determine success. Can you handle the pressure? Of course, there's a special offer for as you Locked On UCLA listeners. Use the code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Take advantage of the perk. But the game, reminder, is completely free. No ads, 100% playable offline. You can play it on the go whenever you want. Download the game at ultimate-cfb.com. Ultimate-cfb.com. Look it up in the App Store. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, cruising on here, second segment for Locked On UCLA. Let's talk UCLA football because they did what they needed to do defensively, right? In a surprising turn of events, this is a UCLA team that was led by their defense in week 1 against Hawaii. And if the defense didn't perform for 4 quarters, UCLA does not win that game against Hawaii in week 1. Now, I know what you're probably going to say. You're going to say something along the likes of, Braden Shaker literally could not move in the second half. And for a large part of the first half, Hawaii's quarterback who had an ankle injury and was clearly hobbled. Their best receiver, Pofele Ashlock, dropped balls because one of his fingers was hurt on one of his hands. That's what you literally need as a receiver, okay? But I still think the overall looks were important for a UCLA defense that, despite maybe a first drive touchdown, they performed better than expectations. Now, looking at Bill Connolly's, projections, the defense coming off the heels of last year had some good marks. They got some good returners, and the Bruins did what they needed to do to victory, which included generating QB pressure, generating tackles for loss, forcing turnovers, and still somewhat maintaining a similar identity to last year's model under D'Anton Lynn without the stars. Now, are they going to be able to get DB sacks every game? Can they use that to their advantage? Will there be smaller offensive linemen that they're going to play like they faced against Hawaii? No. All these other teams will have big boys in the trenches. They'll give their guys time to throw, although they won't be using as many quick passing routes, and they won't be throwing it maybe 40 times a game, although that is this day and age in college football. UCLA, 2 picks, forced 2 fumbles, recovered one of them, dropped an interception. The defense, although you could put that as on special teams, tipped a field goal. And they did everything possible, right? Last year was get your hands on the football, physical, forceful, force a turnover. And UCLA in almost all phases, with a coach in Akaika Malloy, who has been a co-defensive coordinator before, has been a part of vaunted defensive units. Last year, who's the coach of that defensive line? That was Akaika Malloy. Now he shifted roles, now that he's the head man of the defense. But it's not like he wasn't a part of the room in the most successful unit for UCLA last couple of years, right? Bouncing around, helping get Leatu Latu to UCLA and everything, right? So it's not like this man doesn't know what he's doing. UCLA still, once they figured it out, was able to keep Hawaii at bay. Now, besides a banged-up Hawaii front, that's a team that had figured things out a little bit better than their Week 0 game against Delaware State. UCLA for Week 1, I already compared this in the last podcast. You look at those numbers, it wasn't like Latu dominated the Coastal Carolina game last year with defensive pressure, QB pressure. No, UCLA was able to have similar numbers against a team who wanted to throw the football, an offensive-minded football team, and the Bruins only allowed 13 points on the road in a hot, humid environment in the middle of the day, basically, in Hawaii and full of a sellout crowd. Yes, it's not 100,000 like they'll see at LSU or Penn State or allowed so many thousand they'll see in Nebraska, but it was enough to get the job done. UCLA kept Hawaii 4 for 14 on third down, 1 for 3 on fourth down, and the completion percentage wasn't super high for Braden Shager, and it was increasingly worse after he started 7 of 7 in this game, where the only touchdown drive scored by the Bows was one that was based off a punt miscue, where they had 9 players on the punt block, punt return team. And that was a huge miscue. That's a whole thing of its own. So then you got to think, if you're a defense mentally, you get a 3-and-out, you're pumped. The mentality to go back on the field, yes, Shager started, boom, 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 7 for 7. But how much of that is coming from like, man, it's hot. They just got their first sweat into the game. They're hyped. You know how many players are probably cussing and furious that they have to go back out there, even ready to get another defensive stand after your first of the season, and you let the punter run 20 yards because you didn't have guys on the field? So, large in part, you take away the first 7 minutes of the game, for the remainder 50 plus, UCLA's defense stood strong in the face of adversity when it came to their own quarterback, throwing a pick from his own end zone, basically. They still nearly blocked the field goal when Hawaii had chances to go increase the lead, take the lead, tie/take the lead late in the game. UCLA stopped it immediately. Okay, and Schlesinger, great game. He was the guy that had a breakout performance for UCLA in this game. Kind of like Kane Medrano's Utah performance, although that was on a bigger stage against a slightly better team with a little bit more stats. But Schlesinger had a big game for UCLA defensively in that game. 7 solo tackles, a tackle for loss, led the team. KJ Wallace, a lot of big numbers, one of those many UCLA transfers to fill the secondary because Danton Lynn took 1 or 2 over to USC. Kaho, great opportunity. Opportunity as a guy that might be a comeback player of the year, on that watch list, having to battle for 4 years at UCLA after a few at Alabama, comes in, sack, pass defended, 4 tackles, 3 by himself, amazing. Even Brian Addison helping leading the tackles, right? And this, because Hawaii throws a lot, you're going to see a lot of the DBs at the higher end of who led the tackling for UCLA earlier in this game, which is why you might see Oladipo only with 1 solo tackle in this game, which is why you might see Keanu Williams lower on the list as UCLA was rotating D linemen, those interior D linemen, right? Jay Tawia, 1 solo tackle. Well, because Hawaii was throwing the ball, so they would either have to sack the guy or just generate pressure up the middle. Hawaii in this game ran it a total of 28 times. 9 of those came from Braden Shager. And then the other one comes from the punter, who had the leading rush of 19 yards on that 4th down run. So if you take away QB scrambles and a punter run, Hawaii's probable actual design runs were 18, right? Compared to 42 passing plays from Braden Shager. And still UCLA only allowed 51 yards. You take away the 20 from the punter, then that's closer to 30 yards rushing. They didn't get fooled, all right? They did not get fooled unless they literally put 9 players on the field. The defense did a B job, right? I was excited about what they did when I gave them their grade on Monday. It was a B. Now, you got a different thing coming with Indiana coming to town, a confident, cocky head coach in Curt Cignetti, who's got a new quarterback bringing a new system, a new energy to Indiana coming over from James Madison and the Dukes, who comes in saying, hey, we're going to go to an old stadium and kick somebody's butt. We're not talking directly about UCLA. We just do that every week. That is the mindset of the team that's coming into the Rose Bowl in a week and a half's time to Pasadena for another semi-prime time-like game to open up the home schedule and inaugural Big Ten opponent for UCLA as a Big Ten member. So can they be led by their defense? With what we saw on their offense, yes, the defense is going to have to play similar, right? They're going to have to play similarly to what they did opening day. Not dominate, but keep them in games until the Eric Bieniemy-led offense with Garbers, the redshirt senior QB, all the talent they have in skill positions. If the offensive line can just protect a little bit and return to what they did in previous years in the Chip Kelly running offense, obviously it's going to look different in a West Coast offense. It certainly will. If the UCLA Bruins can't figure it out offensively, the Bruins are going to have to lean a lot on their defense, which means there's quite a few fixes. Let's talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. All right, maybe you're sitting there, you're listening, you're watching this, you're like, man, it's after lunch. You're tired. Well, you're not alone. Research shows that more than 70% of us hit a wall after lunchtime. Let's take a 5-hour energy, take that 5-hour energy shot and help you leap over that wall instead of crashing right into it. Because it's got zero sugar. It's convenient. It's portable. And it's a perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done, especially after lunch. You're like, man, got to go home. Maybe still got things to do at work. Maybe it's that after lunch big-time snack on a Saturday on the college football season. You need that pick-me-up because all the fun is still to happen after the other half of the day. The 5-Hour Energy website also has flavors galore: watermelon, tropical burst, grape, and more, where you can mix and match with a 12-pack or 24-pack. The flavors, try them all, and it's delivered right to your door. Go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5, hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. That is LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. It's only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions and is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, cruising on into the final segment of Locked On UCLA today. What are our bye week fixes? What are the must fix for UCLA, for the UCLA football team? Well, it starts, doesn't necessarily end, but it starts with the run game. Okay, UCLA should not be rushing for only, okay, what did they finish with? 71 yards. And okay, let's take out the Ethan Garber's near 50 yards of rushing. All right, that is not by design for this team, for this offense. You would have 13 rushes for UCLA and close to 24, 30 yards. That's not acceptable. Not really when you had TJ Harden returning, Keegan Jones, and there's nothing to do with those guys when they're getting punished a yard or two behind the line of scrimmage, right at the line of scrimmage, at the point of attack, and they got nowhere to go. Yards after contact is a big thing for a running back, but it's tough to do it when you're just getting absolutely blasted every single time where you don't get a hole to run through, right? A gap, B gap doesn't mean anything if you got you can't see anything. You got no daylight. No daylight in the front of, in a blue sky, perfect Hawaii day, and there's literally no daylight for UCLA to go against the Hawaii front, which proved they were pretty physical against Delaware State. They were missing quite a few tackles in their week 0 game, but they're a little physical. They got in the backfield. They would blow up some Delaware State plays. Other than one miscommunication, they were decent despite being tied late against Delaware State, and they were physical, right? They had one of their leaders, Peter Manuma, came in, blowing up UCLA play after UCLA play. And that was one of their safeties, right? 8 tackles, 7 solo, 1 pass defense. They had guys who came in were physical. They had 39 tackles, and just so many different plays were there. And yes, that was when Jemai Otis, who was the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Week, who was an outstanding defender against Delaware State, you can say opponent, whatever, Hawaii did what they needed to do against UCLA on defense. All right, they hit the game plan. Eric Bieniemy maybe got out called when it came to game planning, and then when the offensive line could not do anything, man, UCLA's got to find a way to wake up the run game in week 3, game 2 for the Bruins as they take on Indiana, who looked impressive in their week 1 victory. Not unbeatable. It is one of those games that we as UCLA fans are banking as a winnable game. That Indiana game at home is marked on the schedule as an absolute winnable game before the daunting stretch of LSU, Oregon, at Penn State. And yes, you got some teams who looked a little less impressive or took a loss in week 1 and might overlook the Bruins before big-time games later in the season on their Big Ten or SEC slate about those teams coming up. But Indiana is one of those games where it's at home. The tradition football-wise there for Indiana obviously is not super long-winded. We can't wait for UCLA to go play Indiana at Assembly Hall this year in what's supposed to be an energetic environment where those two teams will duke it out in the hardwood. But football-wise, that is a game it seems like we're all banking on as a victory or a chance to win and at least look semi-impressive in an entertaining game. Week 1 proved that's going to be anything but for the Bruins against the Hoosiers. And if they can't run the ball, I don't see a way for UCLA to really win that game. And if it means Garbers has to scramble, then technically they could skate by for another week, but they're not going to be able to do that for the next month through the end of September into early October against LSU or Oregon or Penn State. I just don't see that being a sustainable model, relying on Garbers running when last year the thing UCLA couldn't do was keep Garbers upright and healthy. And as much as we might want to criticize Garbers, yes, those decisions were pretty awful in the game. But that just means that if Garbers was the unquestioned starter this year, that's how much gap it seems like there is between quarterback 1 on the depth chart to 2, and then the rest of the freshmen, and even Chase Griffin back there too, right? That just means that's how much of a gap there is for the UCLA quarterback room from Garbers to the rest. And it's a little different when you're just throwing simple passing schemes, trying to find open guys and hit the 1 or 2 routes in the Chip Kelly offense, versus it takes a lot for Garbers. And he has to realize he doesn't need to force the ball into traffic, right? Which is point number 2. Point 1, got to get a running game. Point 2 for the offense, another talk about it. UCLA, unlike last year, doesn't need to force the ball deep in the red zone, because the Bruins can make field goals now, which was one of the high points with Mateen Bhagani making 3 of his 3 field goal attempts. UCLA 3 of 4 for the year. Glessner only missed the 52-yarder when UCLA seemed a little indecisive about kicking it, going for it. The Bruins have a kicker who can make it from 20 to 40 yards, 40 yards maybe, right? Not really sure what they're going to let Bhagani do as far as it's long, but the accuracy, the confidence, and just the sheer distance is not a question for UCLA. It looks like from 40 yards in, for a guy who made 4 field goals against the Bruins last year, is now a part of the UCLA Bruin team this year and hit the game winner in week 1. So you don't need to force the ball if you're Garbers like you did on 3rd and goal. Imagine if UCLA, yes, we wanted them to tie it early on, get it to 7-7, whatever it may be, but 7-3, all right, that it just changes the game. Think about that LSU USC game. If LSU kicks the field goal early, that's a different game. It's a different game. How many times can UCLA take the points this year? They should. And if UCLA can only get 3 points in certain opportunities, okay, yes, it's going to suck, but the Bruins are going to need to get the points. And if the defense can play, solidly, you need to give them motivation, even if it's only a 3-point lead. Getting down and leaving with 0 is not acceptable like they did so many times last year. Whether it's missing a field goal, having to go for it, being a riverboat gambler, whatever it may be, they got to get the points, which leads to good decisions by Garbers, yes, the whole game, but mainly in the red zone, where, yes, larger part, maybe a lot of those issues weren't his fault last year, but UCLA needs to bank on good redshirt senior QB decisions when it comes to, all right, throwing the ball out of play, taking the field goals, like they did in the second half, went down the field. Hawaii bent but did not break a large part of those second half drives with the Bruins. They had 4 scoring drives. That's hard to do as an opposition, to stop 4 scoring drives. And if the Big Ten is as gifted as they say offensively, which means they're going to take points, UCLA needs to be able to get to kick their field goals. Even if it's not as exciting, sometimes boring is going to help you out in the long run in a game, even if UCLA is playing pretty conservatively when it comes to going for 4th down deep in opponent territory. Take the field goals. Play much smarter. Run game, play smarter. And then special teams, got to figure it out. If you got 2 players with double numbers, that's a big thing, right? You got a former special teams coordinator in Kaika Malloy, although he's focused on the defense. You got Norwood, who's focused a large part on the defense, but then as the special teams coordinator also has to turn around after 3rd down and make sure that, hey, let's make sure we got our guys on the field. That's a week 1 mistake, but it was very costly. That happens again later in the season. Big mistake. At least it's not something on tape that was something very vulnerable. That's like a week 1 mistake that hopefully after 2 weeks of practices from bye week till week 3 can lead UCLA to a much easier transition from 3rd down stop to punt, block, punt, return, which we did not see anything like that for the rest of the game. But those hidden mistakes must change. Okay, those are just some of the bye week fixes UCLA needs to have in order to compete and beat Indiana in week 3. And we got more for you guys. Just get your hands up, Bruins fans. It's 8 clap time. Like, comment, subscribe, download these episodes. Thanks for your support. We'll talk more leading up for UCLA throughout the bye week. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.